Good morning and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alexander and I also go by AJL Bricks. And today we're going to be going through my Temple of Kukulkan model submission. So let's go. So the purpose of today's video is I'm going to be breaking down how I built my Lego model of the Temple of Kukulkan that you can see kind of below here. So I broke it down into 7 easy steps. So we're gonna go through each step to show you my process from start to finish. And okay, so for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about or have never heard of this temple before, it's called the Temple of Kukulkan, also known as El Castillo. It's located in Chichen Itza, which is like it's a region slash city slash town, I think, in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. So if you look up any of the names I just mentioned, you'll find this pyramid or temple, however you like to call it. It's a very famous Mesoamerican temple, and it's like and it's considered like a historical landmark in Mexico. A little bit of information, like finding this temple was completely random. I think I was watching a TV show and I saw this temple and I was like, you know what would be cool if I built something like this and use kind of like the architecture theme that Lego does already right now. So like this set does not include any minifigures. It's strictly based on like showing the beauty of this actual historical monument. What I did is I didn't know a lot about it, so I went on Google, took a lot of photos, and like went through and not photos, sorry. I found a bunch of images on Google and basically just try to like break down what exactly are some key points or key features that I should be representing in this model to make it as realistic as possible to the real life temple. A couple things you'll notice is like on the main area, there's 9 levels. You've got kind of like an altarpiece at the top. You've got like a main entrance, the snake heads at the bottom, 4 staircases, and like the snake heads are a really important thing. What makes this actual model very unique is it's got something called like it's like the snake equinox, I think. I'll put a video up of what it actually looks like, but basically depending on what angle the sun is at during the day, it'll actually show like a snake pattern that goes all the way down the main side of the staircase. I really wanted to show like and feature some of like the important elements of showing that like, okay, like if you were to shine a light on this or whatever it may be, you'll be able to kind of see like a snake pattern that goes all the way down. I did some research and I came across this YouTube video where they apparently did a LiDAR scan, I think, through the actual pyramid itself and found that there's actually 2 pyramids underneath. And what they noticed is that they're actually, over time, they would build a pyramid. Like they would start with the original pyramid, then they built on top of that one, then they built on top of this one again. So it's kind of like a little bit like a Russian nest doll. And so for me, that was like a big key. I was like, okay, like we can feature all of these important parts in this model. So again, the next part that was also important was the snake head itself. I ended up actually having to go through a lot of different iterations on how to build this because the model is to a certain scale, and the problem with the snake head is you'll see that there's a lot of like bigger pieces and it gets super thin. So it's like, how do I represent this and then also make it so that the snake head isn't like 5 times as big as like it should be, kind of thing, because of how bulky Lego bricks can be when you're trying to do a lot of detail. So factor for me in building this, and I actually did a lot of like cool iterations on trying to figure that out. And then in the end, just making sure like I took some I found some other stuff, just a little bit more about the main entrance. Right now, it's illegal to actually climb up the staircase. When you go visit this site, so like as of recording this video right now, like it's impossible to actually go inside of the temple at the very top. You have to stay at the bottom of the staircases. I think back in the early 90s, you were able to go up, and then I think apparently like someone died or something, so they like blocked it off. So there's very, very limited photos of what it is actually on the inside. So this is kind of like a close-up I found of the actual temple. You know, like again, this is another one here, but then I actually found this kind of cool render that helped me. Like I was like, okay, like this is where I thought it would be kind of cool to like think about, okay, like what am I gonna do for like a color? I really actually like this dark red, and you'll notice that on my pyramid, it's kind of one of the ones I kept throughout the whole thing. Yeah, like this is a little bit of like a background of like process. It's like I spent some time planning, just trying to get some ideas before I actually like into the model and then kind of go from there. So the first step for me to actually build this whole model was creating a base plate, creating the layout itself. The main thing that I wanted to get across in this model is making sure I get it as historically accurate as I can with the limitations obviously with Lego bricks. The main thing for me was like, okay, I need to plan out where all these pieces are going to go. So what I ended up doing was in the middle here is where the smallest temple will go. If you remember in the image from before in the LiDAR scan, there's like a small temple, and then the medium-sized temple will go onto the other side, and then the main temple that you'll see is going on across the whole thing. So this was a big planning phase for me. This is how I built it, was like kind of like a foundation area where you're like marking where you want everything to go. And I will say this, keep in mind, this is like the 5th iteration project that I made. I'll actually show you quickly. If I go into my studio files, like you'll notice here, like I did a lot of iteration. I think this was the final version. You'll see like I did a lot of different versions of this. So I'll show some photos of it later on. So I was able to like get an idea of where this was gonna go before I actually like remade the whole thing. Like I think I remade this model like 3 or 4 times. There was a lot of trial and error that took place in making sure that this model would work. So yeah, this is basically what I did for this. And then very simply put, like, yeah, it's just about making a layout and then going and building off from that layout. You'll notice too with how I use some of my studs is like you can't actually remove it. You just basically click a piece on, then you can kind of pull it off. And that's kind of how I built it. So that was step 2. And now we can jump into step 3. Step 3 is actually building the small temple itself. When I did build this model, I kind of did it in reverse. The purpose was like the main temple that you see at the end is the main structure. And so when you build it backwards almost, you kind of keep the same details that go with it. Now, when I do explain this, I'll just explain it in this way. And the reason why I'll do that is because it's the idea of like a progression, similar to how they did it in like when the Mayans actually built the pyramid. Like they started with a small one and then they learned from it and built a bigger one that was a little bit better. And then so if you actually like go into this model itself, it's not very big. It's very, very simple, but it's about showing off the key characteristics that are going to continue on for the rest of the model. So that includes like these corner pieces, that includes like the simple indents. You can kind of see that when you kind of zoom in a little bit more, you've got a little bit of like a different pattern. So it's a sense of like you have like piece that's, you know, flat and then it indents in and so on and so forth. So it's similar to like when you see it, the images here, you kind of like zoom in onto this, you'll see that you have it stick out, then it indents and sticks out. And so this is like starting the good habits of like, okay, like this is what I plan on doing for the rest of the pyramid itself. So this thing here just sits directly on here. Yeah, like, and I kind of did it very simple. Like I started with the 2 main colors, which was just white, and I'll talk about the colors at the very end, but like the main structure I wanted to just be white, and I wanted to have an accent with that reddish brown. If you remember from when I was talking about it during the planning phase, like I really like that color. So that's pretty much it. All I ended up doing was that. The actual how I built the whole thing is pretty straightforward. It's a very continuous process. So like, yeah, so like this is just kind of an example of like the simple technique that I did actually throughout the whole thing, where it's a lot of like base plate at the bottom, and then I'll be running like a 1x2, and then I'll run this kind of connection piece here, and then like this process is kind of like repeated throughout like the whole structure all the way until pretty much like the end. That's kind of what this is going to end up looking like. It's not anything complicated, and that's not the point. Yeah, like that's the whole process in itself. Like it's just trying to mimic what main temple structure is doing. So the details is more about symmetry rather than it being super detailed. So I want to be able to carry forward the same steps that I did in the main temple all the way down to the bottom. And that's the whole point. So like these corner pieces, the way I do like the side pieces will be continued throughout the next stage. Now we can go into step 3. So now we've moved on to step 4 or step 3, whatever you want to see on the side of my screen here. But the main thing about this step here is talking about like how we're expanding from the original design. So you'll notice that we have the same base setup where you're running in like the corner piece, then you have like a 1 flat piece, indent, flat piece, indent. And that's again to continue what you see in the main temple where it comes out, goes in, comes out, comes in. And I really want to make sure, because I feel like the details on this is what's important, because this is like a pyramid, it's a temple, so it's a very like symmetrical, sturdy piece. So how do I accent those details is what I really wanted to do. By doing this, you'll notice like it's a continuation, it's a build off of what we did in the previous step. But so now we're kind of going ahead and we're introducing a little bit more of like an altar piece. If you notice in our kind of render, you'll see here the same thing. You kind of have like a small version, and here it's like, okay, we're starting to look like what the main temple itself is supposed to look like. And that was a big basis of how I was going to design these things. And again, the main temple sits directly underneath it, so like this piece is hollow, so the actual structure itself did require like a little bit more like interpretation. So for example, so the main thing here is like if I go in and kind of like hide some of these pieces here, you'll notice that like the actual other temple is sitting kind of underneath it. And so it's just to be aware that like this is like a hollow piece. So like the actual building of it, like this, like when you're building all around, like the main design you see on the outside is the exact same. But when I'm building inside, it's not necessarily gonna be like this sturdy piece where I'm gonna be running like, so you're not gonna be running, for example, like a straight base plate all the way across the bottom and then just building directly off that. You have to think of it as like a hollow section. I will show this better in the main model because I feel like the main model has a better representation of what that is, and that's what we'll get into when we get to like the following step. But in the meantime, the whole thing I want to show is like it's a continuation of the same detail, same pattern. Now we've kind of added like this top temple piece. Obviously, this is a much smaller temple, and there's only so much detail you can put in with like adding staircases and all that stuff. But again, I wanted to make this so it's like iteration 2 of the previous temple in like the Mayan way. So that's kind of like a continuation. And not to mention too as well, like we don't actually have access to this because it's technically underneath the temple you see right now. So you'd have to like excavate the whole thing out. But yeah, like that's really the main piece here. It's just about building off of the previous step. And that's when you'll notice when we get to the final step, which is literally the main attraction, which is, you know, the main temple idea. You know, like this is the main attraction, but we're keeping similar ideas. We're keeping the same style throughout the whole process. So now we're on to the main attraction itself. So when you're looking at this temple, this is what you are seeing, because this is what we see nowadays in the real world. We don't see like the submodels that go underneath the whole thing. But in this case here, I want to highlight a couple things. For me, it was important to be as historically accurate as possible. So I tried to include everything that I could, that I found off the internet and all my research to include it in this model. So that includes the 4 staircases that you see all the way around the pyramid, the 9 levels, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The kind of altar piece at the very top that you'll see, and then also on the inside you'll actually see like the actual, kind of see the actual altar itself kind of through here, right in through there, which we'll get into some detail later on. In addition to that, you'll notice that like we emphasize, okay, we have the main staircase, or like the main section of like the pyramid, and then everything else is kind of like secondary to it. Similar to when you're looking at these photos, you have the main staircase component here, same like details for the columns, and then you kind of have like the basic kind of arches that can go in on all the other 4 sizes. In addition to that, you'll notice that we kind of have some detail at the top of this temple piece here. Same when you're looking at the actual model itself here, you've got some of the indents, you've got like a bar that goes all the way across and around, and I wanted to keep it the same way. So you kind of got like the bar, you've got like the little indents, and the same idea of just highlighting those details using this color scheme in this sense. So that's what I thought was really important. It's like, how do I go and create this pyramid that people will be able to recognize right off the bat, but then also bring in my own creative touch to be like, hey, well, what would these colors be back then during that time when they built the pyramid out? Let's dive a little bit deep into the actual temple itself. So number 1, you'll notice this is hollow, and like all the other pyramids are too, because the other pyramids were placed underneath. You remember from the base plate, that was the whole purpose of this layout. So the way that I built this is a combination of like 3 steps. You'll notice on the left hand side here, you've got the temple layer 1, outside of just building the main base. You got the layer 1, then you got the interior, and then what I ended up combining into its own step later on was actually building the staircase component to that portion. What I did in this model, and this helped with building it, was segregating what parts are what. When I would build like the layer 1, that includes like these 2 layers of tail. So we have the base that goes with it. This is the main base, and then what we would do is we would build the first layer that goes all the way around the pyramid. And you notice we have like a hollow interior at the moment. Then what I would do is I'd go in and I would build first portion of the interior. So I know that the other pyramids need to be stuck on the inside here, so I can use this space as more of like a structural reinforcement. So I just ended up using like a grayish color just to differentiate between using like the white bricks on the outside and then the grayish on the inside in this case. And then from there, you'll notice, okay, we have these gaps that where the staircases need to go. So I would start by building the base. Like I knew how far I was going to go because I'd already planned it out based off base itself that I did on the, so we go back to the main model, and then I just basically like unhide this. You'll notice that the base goes out to here. So this was intended on purpose. That's the whole point of, so when you kind of go back into here, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to build like this portion of the staircase first, then you complete layer 1. Okay, that's great. Now we go in and we do layer 2, which is this next temple layer. This is important to know. The way I was going up on each stage is about by 1 brick at a time. So you'll notice on here, we've kind of got like 2 bricks, 2 bricks, 3 bricks on this corner piece down here. This gets reduced to then 2 pieces at the top here. And then this continues as we go on. So again, we did temple layer 2, then we kind of add in the internal layer piece. And at this point here, we haven't gone inwards because I know that the temple itself, I need to go to like the 6th layer before I can go inside, because I don't want, and I understand that the pyramid itself is coming inwards, but I want to be extra safe so that nothing's clashing with each other. So I knew, and that's what I was saying before, we kind of repeated this process until around layer 7. It was like, it's just be extra contingent on this whole process itself. Anyways, go through, continue this process, going through each layer. So eventually we get to all the way to layer 7, and now we're up here. Now this is where we're at the first portion of, okay, now I can start covering like the top piece. No, so I did layer, yeah, I did. So in layer 8 here is where I changed it up. Now I'm like, okay, I know I'm bigger than the interior pyramid Now I can add in like the miniature, the layer that goes all the way across, and then this becomes the basis of the temple, of like the altar. Now, something to keep in mind, this set, the restrictions for this set is 4,000 pieces. I was already at the 3,200 mark at this point. So I need to find a way to conserve my pieces to make sure that by the time I'm done this model, I'm not over 4,000 pieces. Because as you'll see, when I add layer 9, I'm not actually adding an interior because I've kind of closed off the top. And then what I'm gonna end up doing is building, like keeping this section hollow because I don't actually need pieces in this area. It doesn't affect the structural integrity of this whole component. So now when we get to like the top layer, okay, now look, we just added our flat piece that go all the way across. This, what it's allowing is basically like I can now add the temple piece that on the very top, and that's what I end up wanting. So this was a way for me to conserve some pieces because I think in the end, if you actually go to the model info, I have 3,871 pieces. Like I'm very, very close to the limit, and I'm trying to find ways at this point, like how do I conserve these pieces? Now we've showed you how this is the process of building this, and when I was talking about earlier on about taking what we did now and bringing it back from previous steps, it's the same idea. I started with this and I took process and repeated it from the middle temple and then the smallest temple, and that's where we're trying to keep that symmetry of like, okay, corner pieces, the large like normal bricks 1x3s, indent 1x2, so on and so forth throughout the whole piece. This is where we're adding those details. So we've completed the base, but now we got to add the altar itself. So the altar itself is, I will say, because there was limited information on what I had, I kind of tried to like make something up that looked somewhat like an altar. I was very grateful that I found this photo here because it kind of helped me. I was like, oh, like I guess a ritual altar would be someone like, maybe it's something like this. I unfortunately, like when you look at a lot of these photos, you can't actually see what's inside of it, and I want to make it so that it's important. Like this is a centerpiece of this temple. This is where I kind of went in, and it took me a lot of time to figure it out. I wanted to make sure that it's kind of human presence. That's why we have like the head. How do I make it so that you can have like, it looks somewhat like an altar? So it's a little bit like creation of mine, and I think, and I really like it in the end. And again, this is where the compare and the contrast of the reddish brown comes into play. I wanted this piece to be white. If I'm going to make the altar piece white, everything, the base around it needs to be in a burgundy red. So now when you actually enter the temple, like you have the temple piece itself here. So when you're actually looking on the inside here, unfortunately it kind of grays it out, but this temple piece with like it sits around the edges here, and then you'll have like the reddish brown that kind of goes right there. Because I'm inside the model, it won't let me show you the inside of it, but that's the whole purpose of this piece here is so that you're able to like see that. And so this is the temple itself. So this is what step 4 is, and I think like this is what's very important, is like showing the details that you see nowadays at the actual Temple of Kukulkan, showing it on this component here in this model. So now we're on to step 6 of 7. We're near the end, which is, this is where we're going to add in the actual snake heads itself. So the snake heads took a lot of iterations, but the whole purpose of this is that I really wanted to show that they are snake heads, but also that they're not too big. Because if you notice, there's a lot of detail when you're looking at these. Like you've got like this really long tongue, you got like the whole headpiece, but if you actually look at it from a perspective of the whole temple, it's not as big as you would assume. The snake heads are big, but they're not like overshadowing the whole temple. Like they're not like this massive sculpture in front necessarily. This is where you had to make a little bit of sacrifices because of how, you know, I'm using a lot of 1x1 bricks here. I can't do a half and a half brick, make the tongue any longer. So what I ended up just doing here was like, okay, I sacrificed a little bit of having that external tongue piece, but we showed it so it's like when you look at it from the side, you kind of got like this snake image that kind of goes with it. And at least that's how I look at it. When we talk about the equinox and how it creates the shadow effect, this is what I was referring to. So you'll see that like kind of like with the snake heads, you have the snake itself, and then on top of that, you kind of have like a shadow piece. And I get that like it may look a little bit different when you're watching the videos, but the whole purpose of this is to show like, okay, like this is a snake. It's to kind of add on to the fact that like, hey, like this is, you know, the Temple of Kukulkan. We can show the equinox shadow that would end up happening. In this case, it's happening all the time with the way that the color scheme is, but hey, like at least you get to see like a little bit of like a cool looking snake, however you want to look. And then finally, for step 7, and this is the final step, all I ended up doing was just adding some grass. I want to make it similar to how they do the Lego architecture styles, where it's a very sleek design. You're not necessarily showing as many studs. It's more about showing the actual architecture and engineering. And so that's what I ended up doing, just to kind of clean it off and make it look really nice. I did add, if you notice, the grass has got a little bit of a pattern to it, just to show, you know, just to make it look really nice in a complete design. I'll just add one last thing. If you actually like look, and this is what I was kind of referring to, actual temples sit on top of each other. So this is what it would look like if you're looking at it from this perspective here. So you'll see that like the middle one goes on into there, and then it kind of continues all the way up. And that's done on purpose. I really want to keep this Russian nest doll appearance to it because I think it looks really awesome. And you'll see how the base plate and planning it out is very important in making sure that like everything is put there properly and like it's organized appropriately. This was a big thing for me just to make sure that I could get this sort of piece done. And like in the end, yeah, like you could, when you build it, remove the top piece, look at the other ones, so on and so forth. So, and then one other thing I'll show is I kind of mentioned beforehand, like what are all the different versions that I ended up doing. I'll kind of go into here, which we were showing beforehand. So I actually had a bunch of different versions. So kind of start like version 1. I'll just kind of show like different iterations to this. So this was like a version 1. You'll notice here that's actually the staircase is very shallow. At the time I was honestly using the wrong bricks. Different color schemes completely. It was actually wasn't even 9 layers. I was actually only running 7 layers because the staircase was getting indented too far, so I didn't know how to fix that. So I ended up going through like, this is one of my first iterations of it, just trying to figure out what the structure is for this piece, and then also the color scheme as well. You'll notice that there's a lot of similarities that I kept throughout the whole thing, but in the end, yeah, like I ended up making 7 versions. The version that you see right now, like, so this is another one where we kind of change up the colors, just different color schemes, just trying to figure out, like I was starting to like the gray, I was starting to like maybe, you know, do I change different colors in between the indents? But what I noticed is that like as time, you'll see as I go on, I try to simplify the colors because I think that's what's more important. You know, you're looking at version 4 here. I tried like a different color scheme. You know, you have the snake head going all the way down here. And then yeah, like version 5, this was one that I genuinely did consider doing in the end, like going something like this, where you'll notice like I really was liking this gray color accenting with the brown and whatnot. Actually simplifying the colors is probably a really good idea. Finally, version 6, you'll notice, I'll kind of go into it very quickly. I made a couple tweaks here and there, but you'll notice that the actual build itself is still the exact same. And that's because I didn't find my mistake. At the time here, I was using 30-degree angles pieces, and that was actually wrong because they're too shallow. If you like think about it from a perspective like 30, if you're looking at an angle, this is 30 degrees and that would be like a 45. So in order to get a steeper staircase, I had to use the 45-degree angle. So but what I ended up liking about this is the staircase comes out really far, and I didn't really like that. So I had to come back and find a way to like redesign this whole component. So the purpose of version 6 was like, I was really liking the fact that I was like, you know what, we're gonna go with like 2 colors, maybe 3 at most, but I need to figure out how to fix the staircase. And then, you know, what you see right now is like this here. So when you actually go through the renders themselves, like you'll see that like this is where I was actually able to fix the staircase. It's more steeper and it actually sink right into the pyramid. The pyramid's able to stand tall and strong. And so when you kind of go through like some of these photos, like you'll see that like just running 2 colors would highlight some of the important parts. So yeah, in the end, like this was it. Like you kind of go through, these were some of the main pieces. That's how I built the Temple of Kukulkan in 7 plus a couple extra steps. So other than that, did enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below what you thought, and make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon. And I will see you guys in the next one.